Welcome to the channel. Today, let's take a look at my top 10 states least likely to go anti-gun in the future. Now, I want to remind you, stay tuned to the end, and I'll give you some honorable mentions that just barely missed the list, and also I'll give some additional information on how I come up with the list. But before we start, I want to explain a few things, and no, I'm not just an idiot. I completely understand that Republicans aren't always a friend of the 2A. But as a whole, they're less likely to push major gun control, and the reason I mention the percentage of the state's revenue that comes from the federal government is mainly because we have heard presidents say in times past that, they'll pull funding if a state doesn't do a certain thing, this or that or the other. And I think that may be what happens in the future of gun control, is they'll threaten to pull funding if the state doesn't, offer up some kind of gun control because they can't get it passed on a federal level. Either that, or they're going to offer additional funding if a state implements gun control. And I don't know if that's a fact. I see that being a possibility if they can't get it passed on a federal level. And one last thing before we get to the list, remember, even if the state's on here, that doesn't mean you can be asleep at the wheel and not be paying attention and not be calling your state representatives and all that stuff. You've got to stay on the ball no matter where your state ranks. All right, let's get to the list. Number 10, Alaska. The last frontier state has excellent gun rights, and the state politicians have been good about not infringing upon that. Alaska tends to be a solid red state. The last time they voted for a Democrat in a presidential election was when they gave Lyndon Johnson a try. But they have voted solid red ever since. Another reason Alaska will probably keep the same political makeup is no one is moving here, so you don't have to deal with those pesky Californians coming here and bringing their politics with them. Of course, there are no major metro areas here either, and those tend to favor gun control. Alaska's population has been on the decline for the past couple of years. One of the downsides to Alaska is they rely heavily upon federal aid, as it makes up 39.3% of the state's general revenue. There was actually a tie between Alaska and West Virginia, and I went ahead and gave it to Alaska simply because owning a firearm here is almost a necessity just for protection against wildlife. Number 9, Missouri. The Show Me State is another state with great gun laws that will more than likely stay that way. Missouri tends to vote red. The last time they voted for a Democrat for president was Bill Clinton, although they have voted blue for their governor several times in recent history. Now, Missouri does have St. Louis in it, and Kansas City for that matter, and they tend to vote for anti-gun candidates. Missouri has been trying to get a bill passed that would basically make the state of Missouri a Second Amendment sanctuary state. It's called the Second Amendment Protection Act, but it seems to have died, but maybe they will reintroduce it. There doesn't seem to be an influx of people moving into Missouri, so it looks as if they will be able to keep a pro-2A majority. Missouri's general revenue is made of 37.7% of federal funds. Number 8, Arkansas. The natural state also has plenty of Second Amendment freedoms. Over the last 10 years, we've seen Arkansas go from a predominantly blue state to a solid red state. The last time Arkansas voted for a Democrat for president was Bill Clinton. But beware, the northwest corner of Arkansas is one of the fastest growing areas in the country, with just over a 21% population growth over the last 10 years. I grew up going through this area often, and it's amazing how big it has gotten, mostly thanks to Walmart having their headquarters there. And if you look at the county-by-county map of the 2020 election, you can see that area is turning pink and is in danger of going purple or blue as the population continues to grow there. But the state as a whole only saw a 3.3% growth in population over the last 10 years. Arkansas receives 37.2% of its general revenue from the federal government. Number 7, South Carolina. The Palmetto State is possibly the only state left on the East Coast where your Second Amendment rights look to be safe for the next few years. But be wary in this state because it has been the target of a lot of Bloomberg money, and with that comes anti-gun candidates. South Carolina has been pretty much solid red across the board for the last 10 years, and they haven't voted for a Democrat in a presidential race since Carter. One thing to watch out for is that South Carolina has the 6th fastest growth rate over the last 10 years in the U.S., so the political makeup can definitely change there. South Carolina's general revenue is made up with 31.9% federal funds. Number 6, Tennessee. The volunteer state has been great on gun rights, and that looks to continue for the foreseeable future. Tennessee has been a solid red state, like most of the others on this list, for about the past 10 years. They haven't voted for a Democrat in a presidential election since old Slick Willie in '92. Tennessee has had a fair amount of population growth over the past 10 years with a 7.5% increase. In the 2020 elections, Tennessee only had 3 counties that went blue, and Tennessee keeps adding counties to their list of Second Amendment sanctuary counties. Tennessee's general revenue is made up of 37.7% federal funds. I want to take a quick break here and remind you, if you're enjoying this video, make sure you hit that thumbs up button. And if you're new here and think I've earned it, consider subscribing. And if this is a video you think someone else will enjoy, make sure you share it out. Now, let's get back to the list. Number 5, Kansas. The Sunflower State has some of the best gun laws in the country currently, and all signs point to them being able to keep them for years to come. Kansas has been a solid Republican state for the last 10 years, till they elected an anti-gun Democrat for governor in 2018. But they have a strong Republican-controlled state legislature. They haven't voted for a Democrat in a presidential race since Lyndon Johnson in '64. In Kansas, you don't have to worry about too many people moving into the state and swinging the vote, as they had only a 1.9% population growth over the last 10 years. Kansas passed the Second Amendment Protection Act a few years back, and it was designed to prevent the federal government from having say about weapons made inside the state of Kansas. But unfortunately, in 2018, that law was put to the test and failed, as 2 men were charged and convicted in federal court for having unregistered silencers. Kansas ranks very well in not needing federal funds. Their state's general revenue is only 23.3% made up of federal funds. Number 4, Alabama. The Cotton State now has great gun laws, but that wasn't always the case. The Deep South is where gun control was born, in an effort to keep African Americans from being armed. George Wallace was the Democrat governor of Alabama for 4 separate terms and was a proponent of the Jim Crow gun control laws, and one in particular that kept Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. from being able to obtain a concealed carry permit for his own protection in Alabama, even after receiving multiple threats on his and his family's lives. But since the mid-1980s, Alabama has turned more and more red. And for the last 10 years, they have become almost solid red. Alabama hasn't voted for a Democrat for president since Carter. Alabama had a 2.5% population growth over the last 10 years, and 36.8% of the state's general revenue comes from the federal government. Number 3, Oklahoma. The Sooner State was late to the party when it comes to giving back gun rights to its citizens, but in the last 2 decades, they have made great strides to become one of the states with the best gun rights in the nation. Oklahoma is possibly the reddest state in the nation, with not a single county going blue in the last several presidential elections. The only other state I know of that can say that is West Virginia. The last time Oklahoma voted for a Democrat for president was Johnson in '64. For the last decade, the state legislature has been solid red. Unlike most states, the 2 biggest cities in the state still vote Republican too. The current governor of Oklahoma, Kevin Stitt, his first bill he signed into law after taking office was our constitutional carry bill. Oklahoma is the first and only state so far to implement an anti-red flag law, and they wanted that to be written in a way that would actually work. And what the law does is it prohibits Oklahoma from accepting federal funds as an incentive for putting a red flag law in place. Oklahoma ranks number 23 for population growth in the last 10 years with a 5.4% increase. Oklahoma's general revenue is made up of 33.8% federal funds. Number 2, Idaho. The Gem State has consistently been known as a great state for the Second Amendment. Idaho has leaned red for the last 100 plus years, and for the last 25, they have been almost solid red. Idaho hasn't voted for a Democrat in a presidential race since Johnson. Idaho has had a strong backing for their Second Amendment sanctuary movement. The thing to watch out for in Idaho is that it's one of the most popular states for Californians to move to, and they've had a 13.8% increase in population over the last 10 years. And that can wind up changing the political climate in the state, so be wary of that. But hopefully everyone moving here are as pro-gun as the Idaho natives are. Idaho's general revenue is made up of 30.7% federal funds. Number 1, Utah. The Beehive State is probably the state I got the most hate for not being on my best states for gun owners list, and it is a great state for gun owners and just barely missed the mark on that list, but it made number 1 on this list. Utah has been a solid red state for 20 years, and like many of the other states on this list, the last time they voted for a Democrat in the White House was for Johnson in 1964. The Utah Attorney General has been very outspoken about his disagreement with the Ninth Circuit Court on a ruling in 2016 that went against the Second Amendment. Utah is another state to watch out for, and its increased population growth from non-gun friendly states. Over the last 10 years, Utah has seen an increase of 15.5% in population. Utah is one of the states that needs the least amount of federal funds for its state's general revenue, only having 24.2% coming from the federal government. Now for a few of their honorable mentions. Like I said before, West Virginia tied with Alaska for number 10, so they're number 11. Wyoming came in at number 12, Kentucky at 13, Mississippi at 14, South Dakota at 15, Indiana came in at 16, Ohio at 17, 18 was Montana, and 19 was Louisiana. A few other states that we really need to keep our eye on in the upcoming years is states like Texas and Arizona. Those two states are at great risk, in my opinion, because they have a huge influx of liberals moving in. I mean, Arizona's just being overtaken by Californians moving in, so I understand. And we've seen it this year. They turned blue. Texas didn't go nearly as red as they normally do. And I think we're going to continue seeing this. And the same thing goes for North Carolina and Georgia. Both of those states are either really close or Georgia may have flipped blue. And, we saw what happened to Virginia a few years ago. Once they turned blue, they started pushing gun control. And that's one of the things that I did use to come up with this list, is looking back at, say, Colorado, Virginia, Washington State, and how once they turned blue, and then they started getting their rights just trampled on. So if you just kind of go back and look at the history of all that, and when they turned blue, and then they started electing, once they started electing a blue president, then they started going blue governors and all that. So then the Democrats overtook it and anti-gun bills got passed. So just keep that in mind, but that's kind of how I came up with the list. But thanks guys for hanging out. Like I said before, make sure you hit that thumbs up button and subscribe if you think I've earned it. Really helps, and we'll see you on the next one.